They framed me. They fired me. And that's how they effed themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. Part 2. I tried to explain to them that I had been given this food by the line cook, but they refused to listen, so I offered to take them to the kitchen to clear it up with the cook. But by the time I had gone back to the kitchen with them to talk to the line cook, he had already gone home for the day. I had no choice but to gather my stuff, say my goodbyes, and head home. On my way out, I told the people working my department that afternoon what had happened, exactly as it happened. They were shocked and angry, but mostly sad to see me go. I decided that on my way out, I would stop by the accounting office and pick up any tips that may have been dropped for me that week, just to make sure I didn't get screwed out of that money. Before heading down, I had the gut feeling to just set my phone to record, and I stuffed it into my pocket with the camera rolling. Although the video was entirely black since it was in my pocket, I did manage to get a pretty muffled recording of Harvey and Frito's voices through the door, discussing how things had gone as planned, and that they had been trying to get rid of me ever since the meeting with my department. I knocked on the door and they hushed up before opening it. They asked what I was still doing there, and I asked for my tips. They gathered what was in the safe for me and handed it over. Despite my anger rising at what I had just heard, I decided not to burn this bridge just yet, because perhaps I could effing nuke it later. I offered a handshake to both managers, thanked them for the opportunity to work there, and left, making sure to pull my phone out of my pocket and record the front of the restaurant, with the sign showing its name and logo. Working in a restaurant, you learn to always cover your own ass. It's true for most jobs, but something was just telling me I would need this all later. If I was being accused of theft, I wanted to be able to prove it wasn't true if ever came up in future job interviews, which is exactly what happened and where this all started going nuclear. On the train ride home, I sent some messages and made some posts on some local groups on Facebook saying that I had just been fired and that I was looking for a job as quickly as possible. By the time I got off at my stop, I had already set up an interview for later that day. I was offered the job about 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the details, it didn't sound like it was for me, so I turned it down. I interviewed a few other places and found one that was a damned good fit, with a hefty pay increase compared to my previous job, and I wouldn't have to deal with customers. It was an auditing job for a logistics company. However, during the interview with the manager of this job, he mentioned he had already called my previous place of employment and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey had told him that I had even fired for theft. Luckily for me, the manager I was interviewing with asked me to tell him more about that. And he was willing to let me pull out my phone and find the recording. I asked if the voice in the video was the same as the one he spoke on the phone with. It was. That was confirmation enough for him that I hadn't made a fake video. He listened to the two managers in the video admit that they had set me up, and watched to the end when I showed the front of the restaurant, complete with the logo and name. The manager interviewing me, who we'll start calling Dean, hired me immediately and asked me to send him the recording. I did. I thought that was the end of it. About 7 months later, after settling into this job quite nicely, HR sent out a welcome all our new team members email, which listed all the newest hires, some facts about them, and had pictures of them all. They sent these out every time they hired a new round of people. One of them, Thomas, was a former coworker who worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pretty glad to see someone I knew and liked coming onto the team. I sought out his desk and went and said hello, and asked why he left the restaurant. He hadn't left willingly. He'd been laid off because the company was under investigation. It had started as a relatively small matter. The corporate entity that owned the restaurant chain had received an email with an attached video. My video that had been filmed from inside my pocket. That was cause enough for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was pretty surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it, since there had been numerous attempts to get in touch with me. As soon as he said that, I logged into the old email I had used when I first applied for the job at the restaurant. I had at least 24 emails asking me to come in to discuss my employment and termination. I never replied. I just didn't care enough anymore. I'd also changed my number since then, so they hadn't been able to contact me by phone. Thomas continued explaining that before corporate had sent someone, Harvey and Frito had talked with my department and tried to offer them all a small pay increase to spin corporate a story about how I was incompetent at my job and failed to live up to my duties. The day the corporate auditor showed up, there had been a small exodus of people from my old department. They quit on the spot, in front of the lady from corporate, let's call her Audrey, and made sure to rat out Harvey and Frito before leaving. Strike one for both of them. Strike two came a couple of days after Audrey showed Harvey and Frito the recording that had kicked all of this off. They denied it vehemently, but there was no mistaking Harvey's voice. It's unique. Not only that, but the video also picked up their voice and mine when we shook hands and had a friendly parting of the ways, which was something they had already bragged about to Audrey, thinking it made them look better that we were able to part on good terms. This wasn't the actual strike two. That came when it was clear they needed to be separated, so Audrey sent Frito to work at another restaurant owned our parent company, and temporarily demoted Harvey to manager. Check out the thrilling conclusion in part 3 posted now.